Thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Efrem Graham. Ahead today, the battle for control of Congress heating up. President Biden on the campaign trail talking about the bills Democrats have passed and keeping up his intense attack on Republican voters.
We must be stronger, more determined, and more committed to saving America than the MAGA Republicans are destroying America.
But the question is, will that be enough to overcome his low approval rating? A warning, China is preparing for an invasion of Taiwan.
They are practicing for war. And we saw that with the live fire exclusion zones, which were imposed after Speaker Pelosi's visit. God knows what they have up their sleeve in Beijing.
As the Chinese get ready for battle, we'll take a look at how the Biden administration may respond. Many Christians got out of Afghanistan as the Taliban took over, while others decided to remain in their homeland.
But many chose to stay to be the ambassadors of Christ there, to be witnesses, to be salt and light.
We'll hear about these brave Christian believers living under the rule of the Taliban and the history of Jerusalem told in a new book with some of the oldest photographs ever taken.
There's no other city on earth that's had its history foretold, from its destruction to its desolation to a revival as a world player. So to be able to see all of that beginning to unfold in our day is really amazing.
We'll see how prophecy is being fulfilled in the Holy Land. All those stories and more today on CBN NewsWatch.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
We begin this half hour with the battle for control of Congress. President Biden will be giving a primetime speech about the soul of a nation and core values ahead of the midterm election. That coming as the president has been on the campaign trail talking about Democratic victories in Congress on their latest tax and spending bills involving climate change and massively increasing the IRS. But not everyone is convinced those moves will actually help the Democrats. Here's CBN White House correspondent Abigail Robertson.
Now that President Biden finally has a few policy victories to tout, he plans to use them on the campaign trail to make the case why midterm voters should send more Democrats to Washington next year.
We must be stronger, more determined, and more committed to saving America than the MAGA Republicans are destroying America.
In recent weeks, Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act, forgave billions in student loan debt, reinforced protections against deportation for DACA recipients, and signed executive orders to expand abortion access.
It's our job to get the message out, but if we do, I think it will help.
Representative Ro Khanna tells CBN News he believes these moves will boost Democrats in the midterms and that the party should support Biden's bid for a second term.
He has led well. He has passed the American Rescue Plan, the largest infrastructure bill since Eisenhower, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is going to bring manufacturing back to the country. So he will have my support.
Tyler Lee, a GOP candidate running for Congress in North Carolina's 12th district, believes the opposite.
What the Democrats are legislating right now is certainly helping us for November 8th.
He claims voters aren't on board with policies like forgiving student loan debt.
I have not heard one voter yet, even on the Democrat side or unaffiliated, say that they're for this. I think everyone is aware that it's just so bogus what they're doing and trying to buy themselves votes, but it's just not flying in District 12.
Lee says personally, he plans to pay off his student loans and doesn't support the debt forgiveness.
Some people decide to go to college, some people don't. And it's just not fair to make someone else pay for something that I chose to do.
Inside Elections' Nathan Gonzalez tells CBN News what matters is how voters feel about Biden's policies 2 months from now.
Ultimately, I think it matters whether these policies help people in their daily life. It's not just enough to pass something. By the time we get to November, I think people will take a look and say, did this help me? Does this help me in my daily life? And until we get there, we're not going to know the answer.
Despite recent policy accomplishments, many polls still show low approval ratings for President Biden, making Democratic candidates in swing states hesitant to campaign with him. We'll see if any stand with him Thursday during his Pennsylvania visit. Reporting from Virginia, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Despite the president's speeches on behalf of his party, some Democratic candidates are still hesitant to campaign with him, while others have openly criticized some of his actions. Turning now to another election race in Alaska, Democrat Mary Peltola has won the special election for the state's only seat in Congress. She beat a field that included Republican Sarah Palin, who was seeking a political comeback in the state where she was once governor. The election was held August 16th, and the results were released Wednesday after absentee ballots from outside the U.S. were counted. It was Alaska's first statewide election using ranked choice voting, where voters rank candidates by their first choice or second choice, and so on for all four candidates. The result is used if none of the candidates get more than 50% of the vote. After Peltola's victory was announced, Palin called the ranked voting system crazy, convoluted, confusing. Peltola will serve the remaining months of the term of the late Republican Congressman Don Young. He held that seat for 49 years before his death in March. The California State Senate has passed a bill allowing it to become a sanctuary state for children who want to get transgender medical treatment, even without their parents' permission. The bill authorizes California courts to take temporary emergency jurisdiction over out-of-state minors. It would make California a legal destination for children who want to make their sex changes permanent. The measure could open a gateway for out-of-state children to receive hormones, puberty blockers, and even surgery. The California Family Council argues the bill will legally emancipate children from other states. The bill now goes to Governor Gavin Newsom for his signature. Other states could follow California's lead with similar measures. Across the Pacific, Taiwan's military is warning it will strike back if Chinese planes or ships enter its territory. That comes amid warning signals that China is ramping up to invade Taiwan, raising questions about how the Biden administration plans to respond. Here's CBN's George Thomas.
China expert Gordon Chang claims Beijing is gearing up for war.
A Chinese entrepreneur, factory owner, a few weeks ago told me that local cadres, officials, came up to him and said he's no longer producing medical equipment for civilians. His factory is going to be converted to war production. And this was not just an isolated case.
Albridge Colby, a former top Defense Department official, warns America should prepare for war with China over Taiwan, warning that a conflict has gone from a remote scenario to a fearfully plausible one. Gordon Chang says Beijing is already making preparations.
The Chinese Communist Party is trying to sanctions-proof itself. So, for instance, it has told its officials to sell their foreign assets so they can't be taken away by foreign governments if they wanted to impose costs on China for invasion.
This as tensions continue to soar in the Taiwan Strait. On Tuesday, for the first time, Taiwan fired at Chinese drones buzzing the Kinmen Island just miles from China's coastline, vowing further counterattacks if Chinese provocations continue. We will assess the threat level and determine whether to engage the targets and exercise the rights of self-defense. And that includes Taiwan pumping more money into its defense budget. That's already a record $19 billion this year. While Beijing continues to claim sovereignty over the island, Taiwan's president, visiting a military base near China's coastline this week, urged soldiers to keep their cool in the face of growing threats.
I want to tell you that the more provocative the enemy is, the more calm we need to be. We won't allow those on the opposing banks to manufacture a conflict with an inappropriate excuse.
China has kept up this military pressure since Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taipei early this month, with almost daily warplane flights and warship maneuvers in the Taiwan Strait.
They are practicing for war. And we saw that with the live fire exclusion zones, which were imposed after Speaker Pelosi's visit. God knows what they have up their sleeve in Beijing.
With growing fears that China is preparing to take Taiwan by military force, the Biden administration is planning to ask Congress to approve more than $1 billion in arms sales to Taiwan. According to Politico, the package includes 60 anti-tank missiles, surveillance radar technology, and 100 tactical air-to-air missiles. George Thomas, CBN News.
Coming up, a closer look at how Christians are doing in Afghanistan now that the Islamic Taliban is ruling that country once again. We're going to hear from a humanitarian aid worker who explains why some Christians have chosen to stay in the country when we come back. A year has passed since President Biden withdrew forces from Afghanistan. So how are Christians there faring under Taliban rule? Appearing on this week's episode of The Global Lane, humanitarian aid worker John Weaver says many Afghan Christians have stayed in the country to be salt and light to the people.
Many did flee. God made a way for many of them to leave the country, but many chose to stay to be the ambassadors of Christ there, to be witnesses, to be salt and light, as also, it's their homeland. And they have the proverb, homeland is like the place of gold. And so many wanted to stay because that's their homeland, but they chose to stay to be a blessing, to be a witness, to be a light in that dark place.
Well, tell me, so how are they faring, John? Are they being persecuted there?
Gary, in some ways it's worse as it's been. As you mentioned, I was there before 9/11, was there during the times of 9/11 and beyond. And now with the Taliban in full control of the country, in some ways it's as worse as it's ever been economically, socially, and in terms of religious persecution. Yes, they are like sheep among wolves, daily being harassed and daily being followed and daily being watched. And it's very challenging for believers in Afghanistan.
Have any of them been killed, John?
As far as we know, yes, some have been martyred for their faith. They've entered that great cloud of witness. Some, as we speak, possibly could be behind bars. Some are in hiding. Yes, there has been intense persecution and opposition from the radical Muslims since the events of August last year.
And it's not just threats from the Taliban. I know from my own time there meeting with believers there, perhaps the greatest danger may come from family, neighbors, friends. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the social pressure can begin right in your own home or in your oikos, your circle of influence, because it's a Muslim context. It's against Sharia law or against the laws of Islam to leave the Muslim religion and embrace another, faith or a worldview. So when people encounter Christ and Christ is pursuing them, the Lord's pursuing them, and as they come out of Islam into the kingdom of light, there is persecution, opposition from their own family, from their own neighbors, from their own community, because it's a Muslim country. In a general sense, most everyone identifies with Islam there in Afghanistan.
So, John, what can we do for them, those in Afghanistan, our brothers and sisters in Christ?
Well, regardless of mistakes that we might have made in the past, we need to be advocates for their situation, because some are still trying to leave. Some are stuck in places in neighboring countries, trying to find, quote unquote, safe places to live. We need to pray for them. They're always asking us to pray for them, especially those that have, seen God's provision, His protection. They've also seen tangible answers to prayer, miracles, and provisions from the Lord and answers to prayer. So we want to mobilize the body of Christ to be praying for our brothers and sisters in Afghanistan. And then there are ways, Gary, that we're getting humanitarian assistance into the country, and we want to continue doing that as well.
And John, at least 76,000 Afghan refugees have found refuge, asylum here in the U.S. What are their biggest challenges?
Yeah, so for some of them, as you know, Gary, they're still stuck. Now, thankfully, I've been to many places in the States where they've been, relocated to different cities. They've gone through the whole process, leaving the country and then going into military bases. And now they're assimilated into neighborhoods and communities and cities. The challenge for them is it's a transition. Many have to learn English. Many have to find a job. They have to find housing. And just emotionally, they're stretched. They're grieving. They're missing their homeland. So those of the listeners that might be aware of Catholic Charities or World Relief or Lutheran services, we can get involved locally through refugee resettlement agencies, helping Afghans that that are here. And as you know, many of them are believers, so we're maintaining contact with them to encourage them in their faith, help them to get involved in a local church. Some of them have started Afghan house churches, and we're trying to help them reach back into their home country with practical and spiritual assistance.
Bipartisan legislation in Congress, the Afghan Adjustment Act, will give many of the Afghan migrants permanent residency and a pathway to citizenship. So your thoughts on that, John?
Well, we're grateful for that. We're grateful for what our country has tried to do to help Afghans, for many years now, but especially in this transition of them coming here to the United States. We do hope that many of them would find that path to citizenship. Garrett, I've talked to many of them. They want to go back to their home country one day.
And finally, what is our responsibility and opportunity, I might add, as Christians to the Afghans settling into our communities? Most of them are Muslim.
Yeah, let's reach out to them. Let's be the love of Christ to them. Let's find ways to serve them. Let's get to know them, practice hospitality, invite them into our homes. And I know, Gary, you've mentioned some of the books that I've written. Would encourage listeners to get books about Afghanistan and learn about the culture and learn ways that you can engage, and you can reach out to us. We're trying to connect as many people as we can here in the United States and different cities to love Afghans, to welcome them, to receive them, and to show them the love of Christ in word and deed.
Also on tonight's Global Lane program, political bias at the Bureau. Time for an overhaul at the FBI. And the producer of a new film on education explains how parents can fight back against woke indoctrination in American public schools. You can see those stories and more on the Global Lane. You can find it at 8:30 Eastern on the CBN News Channel or on the CBN News app. Still ahead, Jerusalem has been conquered and reconquered multiple times, and like no other city on earth, it's rising to its greatest glory. See how prophecy is being fulfilled in the Holy Land right after this. And author and photographer tell the history of the holiest city on earth in a new book. It contains some of the oldest photographs of Jerusalem ever taken. Their book also explains what Jerusalem rising means in the terms of biblical prophecy. Chris Mitchell brings us the story.
Author Doug Hershey uses past and current photographs to show the extraordinary transformation of Jerusalem over the past 175 years. The book continues Hershey's unique look at prophecy and the Holy Land.
Much like Israel Rising documented the revival of the land, Jerusalem Rising is documenting the fulfillment of, or at least the beginning processes of these biblical prophecies about Jerusalem being restored and what it's leading to.
Hershey and adventure photographer Eden Ram comb the city for just the right angles to capture its past and present.
Head in, climbed up the top, there he goes. Looking at, you can kind of look through the fence here. It'll look better when you see the actual photos, but some of all of that stuff right in there is what he's getting a shot of from back in the early 1900s.
To be able to go to some of these locations and find the exact locations where a photographer set up 175 years ago to capture what Jerusalem looks like, and then go back today to the exact same location. Some of the oldest photos of Jerusalem ever taken were from 1844, and we have several of those in Jerusalem Rising, and all of those I don't think have ever been recreated ever.
One of those before and after photos takes place here, just outside the Jaffa Gate of Jerusalem's old city walls. It looks back from this spot towards what's known as the Tower of David. Hershey says most any city on earth may look different over the course of 100 years, but Jerusalem is unique.
There's no other city on earth that's had its history foretold, from its destruction to its desolation to a revival as a world player. So to be able to see all of that beginning to unfold in our day is really amazing. And so that's a lot of what's been documented in Jerusalem Rising.
Hershey says some of those prophecies can be seen on the streets here.
In Zechariah 8, God says that he's going to return to the city and he's going to dwell with his people, which is a profound statement for one of the prophets to say, that God's saying, I'm going to return to Jerusalem and dwell with my people. He says that the old men and old women will dwell safely in the streets, leaning on their canes, and the children will be playing in the streets, and the nations will begin to flood to Jerusalem.
And before COVID, Israel set records for tourism.
Never before in history have the nations flooded to Jerusalem the way that they are in our day. And now, clearly in Zechariah 8, it's in the context of coming to worship the King in Jerusalem, but it's undeniable that these are very beginning stages historically that we're seeing unfold in the city that have just never happened before.
Hershey says if we want to understand Jerusalem, we must look to the scriptures.
Ultimately, if we continue reading the scriptures, if we believe what the prophets said, Jerusalem is going to be a seat of ruling power for a Jewish king. Ezekiel 5:5 says that God has placed Jerusalem in the center of the earth. So locationally, it's already in the center of the earth. And one day soon, and even beginning now, it's already becoming the center of the world's attention.
A city that for thousands of years has stood at the crossroads of history and prophecy.
Jerusalem has been conquered and reconquered multiple times. It's changed hands over 40 times. It's been completely leveled at least twice. There's been literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years where the city has just laid desolate, according to eyewitness accounts. Now we're at a time where things are starting to revive. So prophetic words from Zechariah 8 or Isaiah or any of these prophets about Israel, about Jerusalem, where once we thought were allegorical or spiritual or just abstract concepts, we're finding that God is doing exactly what he said. Never before have these prophecies been fulfilled in such a dramatic and significant way, and it's happening in our day in a really powerful and unique way.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, the Jaffa Gate, Jerusalem's Old City.
We're back with an encouraging word for your day ahead. Please stay with us. Time now for your Thursday Thankful. I hope you will join me in this prayer of gratitude. God, you are good. You've been so good. You've been better than good. You've been so good to me. Now, those are words from a popular worship tune and a wonderful declaration for us all to embrace today. With that word, I encourage you to make it a Thankful Thursday and be sure to have yourself a wonderful remainder of the week. That is a wrap for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. You can always find more of our programs on the CBN News channel. You can find them there at any time, as well as online, cbnnews.com. We would love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can email us, newswatch@cbn.com. You can also reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We would love to hear from you. Hope you'll join us again right back here next time. Goodbye and God bless.